In this next revision video for the Conflict and Tension module, we will be looking at Berlin in 1948, most notably the Berlin Blockade and the Airlift. Since the Yalta Conference in 1945, it had been clear that Berlin was going to be a flashpoint in the Cold War. It came to a head in 1948. It had been agreed in Yalta and Potsdam that Germany should be divided into 4 zones, each controlled by one of the Allies. Berlin was deep inside the Soviet area, with only rail, road and canal access to the city for the Allies. But the other leaders could not accept such an important city being under Soviet control, so Berlin was also divided into 4. Initially, the Allies worked together, each running their sector, but uniting together to make important decisions as the ACC, the Allied Council Control. Stalin continued to tighten his grip on East Germany, and it became almost impossible for non-communists to gain any influence in how the territory of East Germany was run. Berlin remained an island of Western influence within the Soviet zone of Germany. The West, Britain, France and the USA, wanted Germany to rebuild, but Stalin wanted Germany to remain weak and pay the reparations for damage done during the war. It was proposed that there should be a new currency introduced across the whole of Germany, but Stalin rejected this idea. In March 1948, the USA and Britain decided to unite their sectors of Germany, known as Bizonia, later to be named West Germany, and also introduced a new currency. Stalin was unhappy with this decision, and a separate currency was planned for the east of Germany. The Soviets wanted nothing less than the West to withdraw from West Berlin, and in April 1948, Stalin tried to make life as difficult as possible for those Western officials stationed in the city. Soviet troops used their control of the area around West Berlin to block the transport of military supplies to Western troops stationed in Berlin. They also introduced traffic restrictions, closed bridges for maintenance, and searched vehicles travelling to the western sector. This was known as the mini blockade. It caused problems for West Berlin, but rather than encouraging West Berliners to leave, it seemed to make them more determined to stay. On the 5th of April 1948, there was a collision between a British and a Soviet plane over Berlin. This was probably accidental, but due to the lack of cooperation in the investigation, it showed how bad relations between East and West had become. Opponents of the communists tried to argue that both new currencies should be allowed to stay in the city. These were beaten up while the police stood by and did nothing. As violence began to increase in Berlin, Stalin launched a full blockade. Stalin wanted to prove that he had power in Germany and could match the economic power and the unity that the West had shown without risking an all-out war. All transport links were blocked. The Western Allies could not get any supplies, including food, fuels and medicine, into West Berlin. Once the blockade started, the 2.5 million people living in West Berlin were forced to rely on reserves of food, fuel and medicine that would soon run out. To make matters worse, electricity from power stations in the Soviet sectors were cut. The official reason was coal shortages, but it was clear that the Soviets planned to make life as difficult as possible for those in West Berlin. Berlin could now only be accessed by air, and there was only 36 days worth of food, and lacked basic goods, medicine and fuel. Truman and Attlee were clear they would not retreat from Berlin, and made a commitment to hold on to West Berlin. This was the first serious clash between the members of the former Grand Alliance, and it was very clear that the Cold War had begun. Western Allies were not prepared to risk armed conflict with the USSR to open the way to West Berlin. They decided that their sectors would be supplied by air. On the 24th of June, 1948, the West set up a counter-blockade which stopped trains travelling from West Germany into the Soviet zone. This was damaging for East Germany, but not enough for the USSR to break the blockade of West Berlin. Some American military figures argued that the West should force their way through the blockade, but Truman was concerned that this could lead to war, which must be avoided. With roads, railways and waterways blocked, the only route to the city was by air. American planes could deliver less than 3 tons of supplies a day, a tiny portion of more than 10,000 tons of supplies required to keep West Berlin working each day. The first planes flew into Berlin on the 26th of June 1948. American and British planes began dropping supplies into Tempelhof Airport in West Berlin, and at the height of the airlift, a plane landed at the airport every minute. Keeping West Berlin supplied this way cost the USA $350 million and Britain £715 million. Despite the success of the airlift, the Soviets were determined not to give in, and tensions between the two governments were the highest they had ever been. War seemed a real possibility. On the 15th of April 1949, the West launched the Easter Parade. Nearly 12,000 tons of coal were delivered to West Berlin in 1,383 flights. It was clear that the airlift was not going to end. On the 12th of May 1949, after 318 days of the airlift, Stalin ordered the lifting of the blockade. Stalin's concerns about the united West Germany were realized when the Federal Republic of Germany was created on the 23rd of May 1949. This new nation was an independent democratic country with its own government. In response, the USSR created the German Democratic Republic in October 1949. This was run the same way as the USSR, under a communist party, including having its own secret police, the Stasi. The formation of NATO in April 1949 was a response to the Berlin blockade to solidify the mutual defense of countries within the organization. Stalin then responded to the formation of NATO by forming his own version, the Warsaw Pact, in 1955, after West Germany had been allowed to join NATO.